Hello, my name is Amy Franks, and I am a nurse, and welcome to my audiovisual final for week 5 for HIM 301. I chose to continue on with the topic that we started with simulations, and so we will be talking about that today. So as a nurse, I've been involved in many simulations, from very basic, like learning how to place IVs in an arm, a little plastic arm, to responding to mock codes that had high fidelity mannequins. These were really cool mannequins that would had heartbeats that you could feel, and you could feel for pulses, and they would even show the lips would turn blue, so periorbital hypoxia. Really cool technology for these various simulations that I was a part of. But as I was a participant in all these scenarios, I had never really stopped to consider all of the informatics behind it, what all goes into not only developing the simulation, but how all of that data is collected, and the building of the mannequins and all of the really cool things that they can do. So now that we've done a little bit of research on that and I've looked more into it, it got me thinking about where is the simulation world going? What's the newest and greatest thing? Because I've been away from the bedside for a couple of years now as a UR nurse. So I was excited to look some of that up, and we'll talk about that at the end of my presentation. And when we're talking about any new subject, we should first define what that is. So our textbook by Nelson and Staggers defines simulation as using hands-on experiential learning to learn new tasks and processes. Simulation has been used in healthcare for decades. It's not new, and it runs the gamut from, again, the very simple to the very complex equipment and scenarios, depending on the subject matter. There are some ethical premises with simulation education, and those just basically surround the reason for simulations to protect the patient from harm. So instead of letting people practice IV starts on people, they let nurses and doctors practice IV starts on plastic arms, so that you get a feel for the whole process and how to do it safely and get all of the steps down in order and get your mind so that you can do those steps almost without thinking about them and practicing, so that when you actually go to stab a real human being, you're causing as little damage as possible, hopefully. There's an article by Lamnar and Smith that goes further into ethics by mentioning that there are ethical considerations when one develops a simulation. So of course, patient safety is always first, but you also want to look into the ethics of the resources that you are using. So manpower, equipment, those sorts of things. And you want to remain cost effective during the lifetime of the simulation activity. So that means that if you are developing a sim for your class, that you don't want to just automatically go to the most expensive equipment. You want to find out what is going to be adequate for your needs, so you're not spending money that you don't need to. And also that when you do spend that money, that you take into account what the upkeep is going to be for the life of that simulation. So if you're developing an ACLS simulation lab for your hospital so that all of your staff can get their ACLS checkoffs right there, you want to make sure that that equipment is going to be maintained for the life of the time that your hospital is going to have that ACLS protocol. So just being wise with your resources. As far as legal issues surrounding simulation goes, I didn't really find a whole lot in our textbook that talked about specific laws and things that go towards simulation. I would assume that those sorts of things go along with education regulations, so you're not going to develop a simulation that's going to teach the wrong thing. It has to be evidence-based practice and what's usual and customary for the activity that you're trying to teach your students. Again, that Lamnar and Smith article mentioned cases, mentioned a case in particular that caught my eye that was about medical students. And so the medical students were practicing how to do lumbar punctures. They felt like they were doing really well. They all successfully checked off, and it followed one medical student who went to go do a lumbar puncture on on a human and realized that it felt different. And the article talked about the reason that it felt different was because the equipment that they had used had been old and worn out. So, you think about if you have a mannequin and you've got the little piece of replaceable plastic that's there where you actually poke into the spine, if that's been used a lot, it's not going to feel the same as you're starting that LP. So when he went to do it on a human, if he had just if he hadn't realized that it felt differently and he had went ahead and done the skill on a human, he could have caused a lot of harm. And so not only is that like a legal issue for him causing harm to a patient, but also that patient's going to hire a really good medical attorney that's going to come after not only the hospital and the doctor and the preceptor, but also the educators who didn't keep up their equipment when they are teaching when they're doing their simulations. So those are just some legal issues that I found around simulation. Now, the reason simulations are again an important part of healthcare delivery and education is that they're hands-on practice that prevents people from harm and gets practitioners confident in their skills, so that they can go out there with confidence. One of the most common questions I got asked, especially as an ER nurse, because I was doing it all day long with 20 or 25 patients, however many I'd have for the day, every single one of them asked me if I was good at IV starts. And so even like if it's your very first time starting an IV, you sure as heck do not tell your patient that it's your first time. I would as a joke. Be like, oh yeah, no, I've never done this before, you're the first one. And just kind of laugh it off, because then they laugh and they feel better. But you honestly are not going to go out there and tell somebody it's your first time. And you want to look like you know what you're doing. So running through that practice of, checking out their arm, putting on the tourniquet, finding the right IV spot, the spot that you think you're going to be able to get, taking the tourniquet off, cleaning the area, starting your IV, getting everything attached, drawing the blood that you need to draw for your labs, putting the tegaderm over the top of it, getting it all secured so it's not going to come out anytime soon. Those are all skills that you want to be confident in when you walk into that room. So yes, maybe, human anatomy, actually getting the IV stick is going to be nerve-wracking, but the rest of the process should not be, because you've done all those simulations. So that is why it's so important to healthcare that they do these simulations. So you can go in there, walk in there with confidence and be like, yeah, everybody's different, but I know what I'm doing. We got this. Let's just do it. And that confidence is what's really going to help get you through it. Because if you're scared and don't even have that confidence to posture, it's not going to go well for you. As far as data capture tools go, simulations are all data. So it's data that's being fed into the software that's controlling the mannequins and the scenarios, and even some of the super high fidelity mannequins are sending feedback back to the software that's collecting the data, and that's really cool for debriefing. So I found one super high fidelity brand new mannequin that I'm super excited about that we're going to talk about here in a second, that actually feeds the data back to the tablet, and it even shows in real time what was going on with the patient, so that when they do their debriefings, they can look at it and be like, oh yeah, so here's where you were bagging the patient. This is what the patient looked like. Here's the retractions. It's really cool. So there's simulations are all data. So there's tons of data collection tools. When we're talking about even the AV equipment in the room, that's collecting the data for playback, and the audio that's going through the mannequin and what is also being recorded for that same playback is all part of the data capture tools. And so now my favorite part is all of the super advanced cool things that I found. So I'm just going to share my screen really quick and find the some of the newest stuff. Okay, so I did pull up a bunch of windows, and all of these are going to be cited in my my references page. But this is an example of just a basic mannequin. This is baby Anne. Anybody who's taken a BLS class has probably played with this little baby, because it's what you use to practice the baby BLS. So it has the chest. It kind of has a little popping, so you're getting adequate compressions. You can bag it, and it has a little plastic bag that's in there. I used to teach BLS classes, so you take apart the chest, put a little baggie in there. So when you're bagging the baby, the chest rises and falls, so you get that feedback that you're giving adequate puffs. And then it's small like a baby, same size as a baby, and so you flop it over and pat it on the back, so you learn about getting rid of choking hazards that are in their airway. So that's baby Annie. And then there's Recessa Annie that we use for, well, there's like the half one. It's like a mini Ann that they use for like a basic BLS class. And then some of the hospitals that I worked for had the full Annie, and they go and throw her somewhere and call it code on you. So anybody who's taken one of these classes, if you ask them what the first step is when you come across an unconscious patient, they usually will jokingly say, hey, Annie, are you okay? Because that's what they teach us to do in our scenarios. One thing to notice here too, and one thing I didn't realize even as a teacher of BLS classes, is the cost. So baby Annies are about $119 if you're buying them off the Laerdale website. Recessa Annies go all the way up to $1,000. There's not a whole lot more going on with them other than that they're a lot bigger. But they definitely are more costly. And then the next one that I had found was this really cool advanced one. This one just got unveiled at a 2018 conference. And this is from Healthy Sim. It's actually from GomGuard. And it's an advanced pediatric patient simulator. So you can see the eyes look like little baby doll eyes. And if you put your fingers up to it, it actually tracks and all of that. So this is like a super advanced sim for like pediatric assessments and things. So I thought he was pretty cool, and he just looks really lifelike. So that's Pediatric Cal, the world's most advanced pediatric simulator that moves with head movements, eye tracking, and voice to jaw resemblance. That's pretty cool. Next, I had found another really cool one that is this sim characters. So this is a high emotion simulation for a 27-week and 3-day-old neonatal code situation. So it has pathological breathing patterns. It shows cyanosis and hyperoxemia. It has sensors that detect correct position and depth of the umbilical venous catheter for doctors that are going to try to put in a central line through their umbilical cord, palpable pulses on the umbilical cord in all 4 extremities, automated tube position detection during intubation, ventilation using bag mask and neopuffs, and it actually will run off of a ventilator. So that's pretty cool that you can actually put the baby on the ventilator and continue the simulation while they're being vented, and still, so that way somebody can monitor what's going on, like the whole picture. So if you have a doctor that's working on a neonate that's coding or something else is going on, they have to be mindful of what's going on with the ventilator and what's going on with the other systems that they're working on. So I think this is super cool as far as training like neonatal doctors to be able to look at the whole picture and monitor the whole picture in real time. I was just super excited about this one. I even pulled up some of the really cool stuff that it does. You can oscillate it with your respiratory, heart, and intestinal noises with your ears. It's a completely wireless product. It has 1.5 hours of battery use, and if the battery runs down during your sim, you can put the little charger pad like we have for our cell phones in the middle of the bed and put the baby on top of it, and you can continue to work on the baby while it's charging. So that was pretty cool. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about was something that I found during my research last week, and it is using these HoloLenses, HoloLenses for orthopedic use. So this is super cool tech that ortho doctors are starting to bring into their operating rooms and into their practices. So say for this man, it looks like they might have been working him up for like a lumbar puncture or maybe even like a spinal surgery. What they did was they put him through a CT scanner, put those, and this, one of the ones that I'm going to show in a second was like a 256 slice CT scanner. So that's super detailed. And then they upload that into a program that turns it into a couple of different ways, but turns it into a 3D model that they're then able to wear like VR glasses and project that onto the patient so that they can do monitoring, so they can do markings for their surgery. So another page that I found that had some really cool example was this one. So this is for a surgery where they're going to try to fix like an artery or a vein that had ruptured or whatever. And so they're trying to find, they're going to harvest another vein to replace that one. So the first thing that they did was put the patient through this 256 slice scanner. That was uploaded into this Vitria program and it had the coordinates for the perforator vessels. And then it was put through a model generation where between those two processes, it was put into like a 3D a 3D type of an image, and then it was like smooth and all of this high-tech, techy verbiage that's here on the screen. And then it gets inputted into the HoloLens app so that the doctor can then project it onto the patient. And there was another picture somewhere. I might have lost it already. But then you can see that oh, here's another picture. Here it is. So then you can see how they were able to find a perforator vein that they are going to replace with the one that ruptured. And then they can actually project that onto the person with the VR glasses, make their markings for their surgical markings where they're going to cut. And they know exactly where the vein is because they have the model. On this first picture here, you can even see the bones, and it shows all the arteries and veins there that they're working on. And then they can actually cut into the person and have a really, really good knowledge that they're where they're supposed to be. The technology that they use now is a little like ultrasound Doppler. Depends on the size. Like the Dopplers are really tiny ones, and they have little like bedside ultrasound machines, and they run that up and down the area. And that's great. It kind of shows you maybe where it is. I used to do IV starts with ultrasound, but it's not an exact science. You're still kind of guessing and having to dig around when you're starting an IV that way. I can't even imagine like cutting into a patient and trying to find the vein that you're going to harvest that way. So this is super exciting. I saw another picture too where they were doing this for like pre-surgery repairs for like femur fractures and things where like the bones are like kind of split everywhere, and they're able to map exactly where they are and have that projected onto the patient as they're doing surgery, which is super cool. So that is my presentation on our the simulation and how that works into informatics. So I tried to put in some extra and not just kind of go over what we talked about this week in our class. So hopefully I was successful, and thank you so much.